Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Rosa and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Prunella Rosa. This week, we're discussing Moody's, who has downgraded U.S. debt, reigniting de-dollarization fears. Now, Prunella, for as long as I can remember, there's always been this panel at conferences that I've been to, about dollar dominance and whether the dollar is receding from sort of preeminence in the world, and the answer has always been something like it might one day, but not just yet. Is that answer changing now? And tell me more about what Moody's downgrade means for the dollar.
Yeah, so we need to unpack also because the column itself speaks also about the historical events that led to the rise of the dollar, and for here we might be towards the end of its domination. So let's unpack. So the Moody's communicate spoke about a few things. First, clearly rising debt is almost an all-time high in U.S. history in terms of um, uh, debt to GDP ratio, superior to the Napoleonic Wars, World War II, independence, anything. Then uh, and then of course that's the historical perspective, and is the government doing anything to make it change? And the answer is not really. And uh, Republican, Democratic, nothing. So this trajectory is not meant to change. First thing. Second thing, they put a positive spin on some things they are monitoring, including the rule of law and the independence of the central bank. They say, we believe that the rule of law and separation of powers will continue to apply in spite of political noise, and we continue to believe that the independence of central bank is granted. And on the basis of this, then we put a stable outlook. Clearly, if you read between the lines, what they're saying is we are monitoring these things very closely. And if something changes, more downgrades will come. So just don't rest of your nose. Moody's was the last one to downgrade the dollar. Sorry, the treasury. S&P was the first, almost a decade ago, and Fitch was the second. And so Moody's was the last man standing, and now it's not standing anymore. Clearly, the events of the last few months, we have discussed them in various occasions, Liberation Day, the tariffs, the recession fears, and all the rest of it, uh, has had this impact. Now, does it mean that this is the end of the dollar? No. We have discussed in several occasions, these things don't happen all at once. It
Mm,
happens over the course of the year, and that's why we're still looking at things from an historical perspective.
yeah. Um, let's start maybe as well with some of the history that's relevant to a lot of this, particularly maybe starting at something like the end of the 19th century, where one currency hegemon was replaced by another. What did we learn about sort of how currencies gain preeminence from that moment?
Yeah, so that's the key point. The reserve currencies at global level has reached over time, of course. The dollar is just the last one. Actually, I should say the latest one. We'll see who's the next one. Uh, but before the dollar, it was the GB pound. Before the UK sterling, there was the French franc, and then the Dutch um, currency, and so on and so on. So it goes over time, and it goes with the power of the nation behind the currency. Of course, it's an obvious transition. Now let's focus only on the last one: UK to US, pound to the dollar. The way it occurred is between 1917, when the UK ran out of money during World War One. It overstretched, as empires always do. They are over indebted. Eventually, they fight on too many fronts, and then um, they collapse. So in this case, they ran out of money, and in 1917, the same year in which Russia exited the war because they had the October Revolution. The US entered the war. They changed the fate of the war by helping the UK, France, and to some extent Italy. And World War One finished like this. The US retrenched in their own isolation position. And the UK tried to re-establish the status quo ante, I'll say, which means the things as they were before: colonies, domination on global level, um, and domination of the pound, in particular, the gold standard. But the gold standard of pre-World War One was not acceptable anymore. There was not enough gold. There were war reparations and so on. So they had to resort to a different thing called gold exchange standard, which meant that gold was only stored in the US, in the UK, and later on in France. This was 1925. So at that point, the UK re-entered this new form of gold standard together with other nations. Things seem to go in the right direction. We all know about the run of equities in the US, but this didn't end well. In 1929, we know we had the stock market crash, hence the crisis, hence the Great Depression, hence in the US and then all over Europe. And respectively, that led in 1933 to the rise of Hitler in Germany, which in the space of 6 years led to World War II. At the end of World War II, 1944, they had to decide. The war was over effectively, and the Allied won. The Germans and their allies lost. And so, what's the order that were about to emerge? Clearly, America was now ready at that point to take the hegemonic role that the UK had gone, and definitely the dollar was ready to substitute the British pound. And that was established in the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944. So the entire length of the period was 1917 to 1944, 27 years. And the conditions were already in place. The economic conditions was already in place because, as you said, at the end of the 19th century, the US already had industrial production larger than the UK, so was ready to kind of overtake the UK in the dominant position. So let's assume that the US got their prominent position, let's say around 1880, and then eventually got their final stamp on the fact that they became the dominant power with the reserve currency of the world in 1944. So here we are talking about something like 50 to 60 years of transition from the moment in which conditions were in place for the change to occur and the actual final stamp is put. Why we are saying all this? Because when people say, the US dollar is not just yet at the end and so on, it's true. But the question is, in what phase of this very long process we are? That's the real question. Now, the conditions are already in place because China's industrial production have overtaken that of the US, Germany, Japan, put together already years ago. So that thing is not going to change. So the conditions are in place. Now, when is today's 1917? So when is the official moment in which the transition has begun? In my view, we have an exact date, and this is Liberation Day, 2nd of April, 2025. The US proclaims to the world, we don't want our empire anymore. It's too costly. The cost of keeping is superior to the benefits deriving from it. So thank you very much. It's been great. Off you go. If you're able to defend yourself, that's better. If you're unable, I'm sorry for you. That's more or less the message. And then, of course, there's been the pedaling back and the negotiation, but that's, sideshow in a very clear trend. So the conditions for China to overtake were in place already 10, 20 years ago. The official date for the beginning of the de-dollarization process has been set on the 2nd of April 2025, but now it can still take 20 to 30 years for China to become the new hegemon. And as I said before, between 1917 and 1944, we had two world wars and one Great Depression to go from the UK to the US. So this is how cumbersome, troublesome, complicated these transitions are. It's not going to occur in days. It's not going to occur in months. It's not going to occur in 3, 4 years. It takes decades. The problem is that these decades have already started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that you finish off this sort of this views letter by quoting Hemingway, which we don't usually do with the views letters, but you say, Hemingway said about bankruptcy, it occurs gradually and then suddenly, and that's true of the collapse of powers in foreign policy and strategic studies. It's clearly also true in macroeconomics. So not one to watch in the weeks or months ahead, but really in the decades ahead, hopefully when we'll still be doing this podcast. Uh, but as
Yes, our
Brunello,
120th editions of
yeah,
podcast.
absolutely. As always, Brunello, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you. Until next time.